The self-concept is a relatively stable set of perceptions you hold of yourself. So if a special mirror existed that reflected not only on your physical features, but on the other aspects of yourself, such as your emotional states, talents, likes, dislikes, values, roles, and so on, the reflection you would see would be your self-concept. Knowing who we are is essential because without a self-concept, it would be impossible to relate to the world. Now, while the self-concept describes who you think you are, self-esteem involves evaluations of self-worth. People with high self-esteem tend to think well of others and expect others to be accepted by them. On the other hand, those who dislike themselves are likely to behave in ways that others won't like them either. Sometimes this low self-esteem is manifested in hostility towards others because the communicator takes the approach that the only way to look good is to put others down. High self-esteem has obvious benefits, but it doesn't guarantee interpersonal success. People with exaggerated self-esteem may think they make better impressions on others and have better friendships and romantic lives, but neither impartial observers nor objective tests verify these beliefs. You will almost certainly find some terms that describe your personality, characteristic ways that you think and behave across a variety of situations. Your personality tends to be stable throughout your life, and often it grows more pronounced over time. While you may have a disposition towards traits like shyness or aggressiveness, you can do a great deal to control how you actually communicate. More and more research suggests that personality is flexible, dynamic, and shaped by those experiences. In fact, the messages we receive from the people in our lives play a central role in shaping how we regard ourselves. Social scientists use the metaphor of the mirror to identify the process of reflected appraisal, the fact that each of us develop a self-concept that reflects the way we believe others see us. In other words, we're likely to feel less valuable, lovable, and capable to the degree that others have communicated ego-busting signals, and we'll probably feel good about ourselves to the degree that others affirm our value. To illustrate this point further, let's start at the beginning. Children aren't born with any sense of identity. They learn to judge themselves only through the way others treat them. As children learn to speak and understand language, verbal messages contribute to a developing self-concept. These same principles in the formation of the self-concept continue later in life, especially when messages come from what sociologists term significant others, people whose opinions we especially value. A look at ego boosters and busters will show that the evaluations of a few very especially important people can be very powerful. Family members are probably the most obvious type of significant other, and their ego busters can be particularly hurtful as a result. Others, though, can also be significant others. A special friend, a teacher, or perhaps an acquaintance whose opinion you value can leave an imprint on how you view yourself, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. To see the importance of significant others, ask yourself, how did you arrive at your opinion of yourself? As a student, as a person attractive to others, as a competent worker? And you will see that these self-evaluations were probably influenced by the way others regarded you. In addition to these messages, each of us forms a self-image by the process of social comparison, and that is when we evaluate ourselves in terms of how we compare to others. Two types of social comparisons need highlighting. The first type, we decide whether we are superior or inferior by comparing ourselves to others. For instance, research shows that young women who regularly compare themselves with ultra-thin media models develop negative appraisals of their own bodies. Men too compare themselves to media-idolized male physiques and evaluate their bodies negatively. People also use others' online profiles as a point of comparison, and they may feel less attractive after doing so. In addition to the feelings of superiority and inferiority, social comparison provides a way to decide if we are the same or different from others. Thus, it's easy to recognize that the reference groups against which we compare ourselves play an important role in shaping our view of ourselves. These facts are obvious. Though it's true that some features of the self are immediately apparent, the significance we attach to them, the rank we assign them in the hierarchy of our list, and the interpretations we give them depends greatly on the opinion of others. The self-concept is subjective. Not all distortion of the self-concept is positive. Many people view themselves more harshly than the objective facts warrant. Distorted self-evaluations like these can occur for several reasons. Obsolete information. The effects of past failures in school or social relationships can linger long after they have occurred, even though such events don't predict failure in the future. Likewise, your past successes don't guarantee future successes. Distorted feedback. The remarks of overly critical parents, cruel friends, uncaring teachers, excessively demanding employers, or even memorable strangers can have a lasting effect. Other distorted messages are unrealistically positive. For instance, a child's inflated ego may be based on the praise of doting parents, and a boss's inflated ego may come from the praise of brown-nosing subordinates. Perfection. From the time most of us learn to understand language, we are exposed to models who appear to be perfect. The implicit message is, a well-adjusted, successful person has no faults. Given this naive belief that everyone else is perfect and the knowledge of that one isn't, it's easy to see how one's self-concept could suffer. Social expectations. The perfectionist society to which we belong rewards those people who downplay the strengths we demand that they possess or pretend to possess. We consider those who honestly appreciate their strengths to be braggarts or egotistic, confusing them with the people who boast about their accomplishments they do not possess. This convention leads to most of us to talk freely about our shortcomings while downplaying our accomplishments. Scholars have coined the term internet-mediated reflected appraisal to describe how communicators draw conclusions about themselves by considering how others view online. Of course, this raises the questions of the validity of these self-appraisals. Social media profiles are edited presentations that usually put a person's best foot forward, but at the very least, social networking sites can be a tool for helping people view themselves in the best possible light. The self-concept resists change. Although we all change, there is a tendency to cling on to existing self-concept, even when evidence shows that it is obsolete. The tendency to seek and attend to information that conforms to an existing self-concept has been labeled cognitive conservatism. This tendency toward cognitive conservatism leads us to seek out people who support our self-concept. Communicators who are presented with information that contradicts their self-perception have two choices. They can either accept the new data and change their perception accordingly, or they can keep their original perception and in some way refute the new information. There is a variety of strategies for embracing a more positive self-image. Have a realistic perception of yourself. While some people have inaccurate, inflated egos, others are their own worst critic. A periodic session of recognizing your strength is often a good way to put your strengths and weaknesses into perspective. Having realistic expectations. So if you demand that you handle every act of communication perfectly, you're bound to be disappointed. And if you constantly compare yourself with gifted people, you're going to come up short. Rather than feel miserable because you're not as talented as an expert, realize that you are probably better, wiser, a more skillful person than you used to be, and that is the legitimate source of satisfaction. Having the will to change. Often we say we want to change when in fact we simply are not willing to do the work that's required. You can change in many ways, if only you're motivated to do so. And having the skill to change. Trying isn't always enough. In some instances, you would change if you knew how to do so. So seek out the advice from books, ask for suggestions from instructors or counselors or other experts. Observing models can be a powerful way to master new ways of communicating. Watch what people you admire do and say, not so that you can copy them, but so that you can adapt their behavior to fit into your own personal style. A self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a person's expectation of an event and his or her subsequent behavior based on those expectations make the event more likely to occur than otherwise would have been true. The self-fulfilling prophecy involves 4 stages. 1. Holding an expectation for yourself or for others. 2. Behaving in accordance with that expectation. 3. Coming to pass of the expectation. 4. Reinforcing the original expectation. The self-imposed, self-fulfilling prophecies occur when your own expectations influence your behavior. In one study, communicators who believed that they were incompetent proved less likely than others to pursue rewarding relationships, and are more likely to sabotage their existing relationships than to people who were less critical of themselves. A second category of self-fulfilling prophecy is imposed by one person onto another. An illustration of the self-fulfilling prophecy imposed by one person onto another has been demonstrated in a study where the experimenters told teachers that 20% of the students in a certain elementary school showed unusual potential for intellectual growth. These names of these 20% were drawn randomly. 8 months later, these gifted children showed significantly greater gains in IQ than the remaining children, who had not been singled out for the teacher's attention. The change in the teacher's attention towards these alleged special students led to changes in the intellectual performance of these randomly selected children. Among other things, teachers gave smart students more time to answer questions, more feedback, and more praise. In other words, the selected children did better, not because that they were more intelligent than their classmates, but because their teachers held higher expectations of them and treated them accordingly. Now, this type of self-fulfilling prophecy has been shown to be a powerful force for shaping the self-concept, and thus the behavior of people in a wide range of settings outside of school. Impression management is the communication strategies people use to influence how others view them. The perceived self is a reflection of the self-concept. Your perceived self is the person you believe yourself to be in moments of honest self-examination. Now, we can call the perceived self private because you are unlikely to reveal all of that to another person. In contrast to the perceived self, we have the presenting self, and that is our public image, the way we want others to view us. The presenting self is sometimes called one's face. In most cases, the presenting self that we seek to create is a socially approved image: the diligent student, the loving partner, the conscientious worker, a loyal friend, and so on. Social norms often create the gap between the perceived and presenting selves. Just recall how you behave in front of a mirror when the door is locked, and you will appreciate the difference between public and private behaviors. So if you knew that someone was watching, would you act differently? There's a variety of characteristics that form the impression management. One is that we strive to construct multiple identities. As you grew up, you almost certainly changed characters as you interacted with your parents. In other words, in a single day, most people perform a variety of roles: the respectful student, the joking friend, the friendly neighbor, or the helpful worker, just to name a few. Impression management is collaborative. Sociologist Irving Goffman suggests that each of us is a kind of playwright who creates roles, and that reflects how we want others to see us, as well as a performer who acts out those roles. But unlike the audience for the most forms of acting, our audience is made up of other actors who are trying to create their own characters. Impression-related communication can be viewed as a kind of process theater in which we collaborate with other actors to improvise scenes in which our characters mesh. Impression management can be deliberate or unconscious. There's no doubt that sometimes we are highly aware of managing impressions. Most job interviews and first dates are clear examples of deliberate impression management. So why do we manage impressions? Well, one reason why we manage impressions is to start or manage relationships. Think about times when you have consciously and carefully managed your approach when meeting someone you would like to know better. You may do your best to appear charming and witty, or perhaps cool or suave. You don't need to be a phony to act this way. You simply are just trying to show your best side. Once relationships are up and running, we still manage impressions, perhaps not as much, but often. We also manage our impressions to gain compliance of others. You might, for example, dress up for a visit to traffic court in hopes that your image, as a responsible citizen, will convince the judge to treat you more sympathetically. You might chat sociably with neighbors you don't find especially interesting so that you can exchange favors or solve problems as they come up. Sometimes we manage impressions to save others' face. So, we often modify the way we present ourselves to support the way other people want to be seen. For example, able-bodied people often mask their discomfort upon encountering someone who is disabled by acting nonchalant or stressing similarities between themselves and the disabled person. And the last reason why we manage impressions is to explore new selves. Sometimes we try on a new self in the same way we try on different style of clothing to see if it changes the way others view us and how we think we feel about ourselves. In face-to-face interaction, communicators can manage their front in 3 ways: manner, appearance, and setting. Manner consists of a communicator's words and nonverbal actions. Physicians, for example, display a wide variety of manners as they conduct physical examinations. Some are friendly, conversational, whereas others adopt a more curt, impersonal approach. Along with the content of speech, nonverbal behaviors play a big role in creating impressions. So a doctor who greets you with a smile and a handshake comes across differently from one who gives nothing more than a curt nod. Manner varies widely from other professions and settings. Professors, salespeople, hairstylists, and so on, and the impressions they create vary accordingly. Because you have to speak and act, the question isn't whether your manner sends a message, but rather what message it will send. The second dimension of impression management is appearance, the personal items that people use to shape an image. Sometimes appearance is part of creating a professional image. So a physician's white lab coat or a police officer's uniform both set the wearers apart from someone special. We choose clothing that sends a message about ourselves, sometimes trendy, sometimes traditional. Some people dress in ways that accent their sexuality, whereas others hide it. Clothing could say, I'm an athlete, I'm wealthy, I'm an environmentalist. Do you make an effort to look friendly and confident? A final way to manage impressions is through the choice of setting, physical items that we use to influence how others see us. In modern Western society, the automobile is a major part of impression management. This explains why many people lust after cars that are far more expensive and powerful than they really need. A fancy convertible or fancy imported car doesn't just get drivers from one place to another. It also makes statements about the kind of people they are. So physical settings they choose and the way we arrange it are another important way to manage impressions. Self-disclosure is the process of deliberately revealing information about oneself that is significant and would not normally be known by others. Self-disclosure must be deliberate. Besides being deliberate, the information must also be significant. So volunteering trivial facts, opinions, or feelings that you like to fudge, for example, hardly counts as disclosure. The third requirement is that the information being disclosed is not known by others. There's nothing noteworthy about telling others that you are depressed or elated if they already know that. Social psychologists have developed a model called the social penetration model. The first dimension of self-disclosure in this model involves breadth, which is the information volunteered, the wide range of subjects being discussed. And the second dimension of self-disclosure is the depth of information that is volunteered. So the shift from relatively impersonal messages to more personal ones. Depending on the breadth and depth of information shared, a relationship can be casual or intimate. In a casual relationship, the breadth might be great, but not deep. A more intimate relationship is likely to have high depth in at least one area.